We left off last video basically wrapping up the app with our UI view controller representable, showing our Safari view controller. In this video, we're going to do a last minute refactor pass and quick little project organization. And then we're going to convert this into a list and navigation, detail view. So let's get on with the quick refactor because we got all our files here. So let's go file by file, then we'll reorganize it like in the folders here. So our view model here, pretty simple, not much to do here. One quick styling thing I like is if I have a simple did set or will set, whatever, and it's on one line like this, I like to just clean it up if it's like super simple, right? You don't want to make it the one line terribly hard to read and super long, but this is a real quick short line, super simple thing. So I like to put that there in that circumstance. Personal preference, just me. All right, next file. Let's get rid of our preview here because we're not going to need that. We need to focus on the code. Okay, so what we can do here is this grid items, even though it is directly related to how the view should look, again, I kind of like to put this into the view model. So I cut that. Let's go back to our view model here, and below these variables, we can just say let columns equal that. So now in our view, again, I like the view to be as clean and like dumb as possible. So it's very easy to read for one thing. So now instead of columns, we just do view model.columns. There we go. We're getting the same thing there. And then let's actually bring our preview back up because anytime you're refactoring, you definitely want to make sure you don't break stuff, right? So hit resume on our preview, try again, preview, work with me preview, try again, no, play, okay. Okay, I guess we're giving up on previews here. Let's get rid of that. We'll just do it the old fashioned way. And this is what I was talking about, how previews are great, like when they work. Okay, so running it on the simulator the old fashioned way, refactoring our columns, didn't break it, we're good, cool. Okay. So like I mentioned earlier when we built this, I feel like this is nice and clean, very simple, no need to refactor there. Same thing, sheet is presented, no need to refactor here. Scrolling down, okay, here we have our framework title view. And remember what I said about project organization, this is used in multiple screens, right? It's used on our grid and it's used on our detail. So I want to put this into its own file. So we'll do Command X there, Apple Frameworks, Command N, new Swift UI view, next, call this framework title view, create, cool, there it is. And then in my body, or actually I think I copied the whole thing. Yeah, so we'll just overwrite the whole struct there. Framework title view, good to go. Missing an argument for the parameter and call. That's right, it takes in a framework, right? And then we have our mock data.sample framework. And then back to our grid view to make sure it's gone. Yep. So our framework grid view just shows our grid view. And we have our separate file here for framework title view. Cool. And again, I'm just going file by file. So we did our grid view. That's good. Our framework model, pretty straightforward, right? Just a basic model and then all of our mock data. Cool. Our detail view. See if there's anything that really stands out here. You could, let me do a Command B. Let me do a Command B to see if I can get my syntax highlighting back. Xcode. There we go. Yeah, let's do this, right? Because this X, right? If I pull up the canvas on the preview here on our detail view, resume. Right, you can imagine in your app, you're going to have a lot of modal displays. Well, you could have a lot of modal displays. So this X could be a common thing you need to put, on multiple screens. So let's refactor out this button H stack here. We'll actually keep the padding as well. I mean, that's debatable. You could add the padding as you need it on each screen, or you could include it because you're pretty much going to need it. Because if you don't put it, it's going to push it all the way to the edge. We don't want that. So I'm going to do Command X there, new file, Command N. Swift UI view, we'll call this X dismiss button, create, there we go, and then paste it into our body. HStack's get a preview of that nice little X, it'd be pretty basic. Okay, forgot something. Oh, that's right, we have to pass in our binding, right? So I need a @binding var of is showing detail view. And most likely in your app, you're always going to want to dismiss your modal. Like it's kind of the whole point of this X button. So maybe you name it something different. Maybe it's just like is showing modal, right? To be more generic because it might not always be a detail view. But that's, just a little tip there. So you don't actually give your binding things a value. You get passed in a value. So you just tell it is a bool. So now that is good. Whoops, I gotta, again, the previews. Remember the previews are always gonna get you. And because it's a binding, we actually have to pass in .constant and then we'll say false for now. So hit try again. Let's get our preview of our nice little just X. Cool, there it is. Kind of a useless preview, but there you go. So X dismiss button is now refactored. So let's go back to our detail view and use in this space here, X dismiss button, and then we need to pass in a binding, right? Is showing detail view, or if you renamed it to is showing modal, probably a better name. Now we want to pass in our binding of $is showing detail view. And I want to point this out because what's happening here, and this is where it can get kind of crazy by passing bindings down many, many layers of views. And if you find yourself doing this a lot, there's the environment object, which again, we'll talk about in a later video. Passing it down to one child view is basically a must, right? That's the whole point of it. Once you start passing it down to 2 and more, that's when you want to consider environment. So in this case, we're now passing this is showing detail view binding down 2 layers here, right? Because our grid view, right, back to the grid view passes the is showing detail view to the detail view, and then the detail view passes that binding down to the X dismiss button, right? So we're going down two layers here. But the point of binding, and I hope this really illustrates it, is as long as you keep passing the binding down, no matter how deep you go, they're all going to be tied together, right? Because they're bound. So if I could be 5 levels of views deep, and if I switch is showing detail view on that view, it's going to go all the way up the binding, all the way up to like the top level, this framework grid view to change it. Again, that just illustrates how it works. If you're passing it down 5 views, you should probably use environment, which is different. But again, hopefully that helps you understand binding a little bit more. So we just refactored out our X dismiss button here. Cool. So now our detail view looks pretty good. You could argue to refactor out call this like a body text to always have font body and padding. You could do that if you find yourself reusing that a lot. We're going to leave that for now. That's probably overkill for this little app. And our Safari view, again, pretty straightforward there. So we just went our AF button. Yeah, nothing to do there. It's just our button. So we just went file by file and kind of did an extra little refactor. Now let's start organizing these, right? So organization, hugely subjective. And there's not really a best practice out for Swift UI yet. What I'm about to show you is just how I organize my projects and what I have found easy to understand, but that is very subjective. You may find your own style of organization. That's perfectly fine. Just use mine as an example. Take what you like, leave what you don't, but here's how I do it. So I create a new group. I'm going to call this screens, even though that's kind of a weird word in Swift UI. Everything's a view, but this helps me bundle all the views in a certain screen in one area. So I do screens. And now in this folder, I'll create a new group. I'm going to call this framework grid view, right? So this is our grid view. And I'm going to put in the grid view. I'm going to move this out here so you can see it, right? So we have our grid view and our grid view model. Well, those both go in the grid view folder, right? Because they're both related. So that way, when I open up my grid view folder, I got my view model and my view. They're all right there. I don't separate a separate view model folder because now you're going back and forth. It's confusing. I put everything right where I use it the most. So the other screen we have, and the reason I like doing this is because I can go screen by screen and see what I need, right? Is the framework detail view. Cool. So that is just the framework detail view goes in there. We don't have a framework detail view model. That's fine. And then I kind of like to put these in the order that they show, right? So the grid view is first, then you go down to the detail view. So now we're, now in the Apple frameworks, let's build our model folder. So right click, new group, and call this model. Cool. What goes in the model? Frameworks. There we go. So like I said, I have my screens folder, but that's for the overall screens, right? But we have these reusable views, right? AF button, X dismiss button, framework title view. So I usually create a new group called, well, not in model. Let's delete that. So make sure you click on Apple frameworks, new group. Now I call this views, and this is just overarching. So within views, new group, I'll create something like buttons. So we have our X dismiss button and our AF button. So that can be dragged into buttons. And then in here, you can imagine I would have text, labels, images, any custom views, I kind of give their own folder. So one of the custom views here is just views. So I understand this is redundant, but our framework title view is just a view. So that type of stuff for me goes into the sub view of views. I get it. And then usually what I create to keep things separately is a new group, and I call this UI kit components. And that's where I put all my UI view controller representables, that sort of stuff. So we'll drag the Safari view up here. And the reason I do this and I want to keep these separate and compartmentalized is because like I said, I expect this UI view controller representable to not fully go away over the years, but become less and less, right? Like Safari view controller, perfect example. I very much expect a SwiftUI native Safari view very soon. So I want to keep this separate. So when I come back to my project, like I know like what I can replace as this new stuff comes out, right? It's all in my UI kit components folder. So that is the reason I separate all of that. So that's my basic folder structure. Again, views will have views, buttons, text, images, whatever custom views I've made will go in that views folder. Model, and then screens where I bundle the screens and their view models. And if there's any other view that's like only specific to that screen, I'll put it in there as well. So that's a little bit of project organization, little bonus. Now to wrap up this video, let's convert this thing to a list. It doesn't take long at all. One thing I always got to do though, and this is just Xcode, because we moved all of these screens around, like we messed up the file pathing. So we lost our syntax highlighting, autocomplete. So usually I just quit Xcode and reopen it. So that's what I'm going to do right now. All right, so I've quit Xcode, reopened it. We got our syntax highlighting back. That usually happens anytime I move files between folder structures. All right, so let's convert this to a list. Actually, wait, big stop. I forgot. Before we do that, because I want this grid app to persist for you, because we're going to come back to this later, go into your Finder here, wherever you have your Apple Frameworks project saved. So in this folder, I'm going to do right click, duplicate, right? You can call this Apple Frameworks, list. And that's why you have these separately, right? So now make sure you open up the duplicate that's called list. So that way you have that all done, saved, not touched, and you have this list one separately. You can reference them both. It'll be much better that way. So now open up your list one. Okay, pulling up the design, the first major change you're going to notice is in our framework title view. It's no longer a V stack, it's an H stack, right? It's got to go horizontally because of the list. So let's go to our view here, framework title view, and instead of V stack, let's actually open up our preview so we can see this here. Okay, we'll make this smaller here. Okay, so instead of a V, change it to an H. Pretty straightforward. Cool. We may come back and mess with the text size, but just like that, we went from an V stack to an H stack. That should be good. Now let's go to our grid view here, right? Screens, framework grid view, grid view. Okay, so what we can get rid of first is the scroll view, right? Because a table view, or a list, if you will, has scrolling by default. So what I do is I kind of come to the bottom first. Okay, that's my scroll view. Cool, let's delete that one and then delete scroll view. And then the neat little trick here is if you highlight your whole struct here, Control I, that'll line up any, bracer issues that you have. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is let's get rid of our lazy V grid, right? We're not doing a grid. So let's get rid of the lazy V grid and just call it a list. Pretty simple. We're still using our for each because the same principle applies, right? We want to iterate through our array and create our cells accordingly. However, list has a built-in tap gesture. Like we don't need to add the tap gesture there. So let's get rid of that tap gesture. However, what a navigation view has is what's called a navigation link. So again, on the list, when you tap it, we're going to use the navigation controller to slide on the detail view. So the key here is that each framework title view, and side note, if you're doing a list, you should probably name this framework cell or something like that. So anyway, we'll hold off on the naming, because it could be different for a list. Just want to get the functionality in there. So you need a navigation link. That's what kind of triggers the segue here. Well, it's not a segue, that's storyboard. Sorry to confuse you with my lingo. To trigger the transition to the detail screen. So let's call it a navigation link here. Link, cool. That takes in a destination. And you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. I just do destination. And again, this is another one of those cases where autocomplete is confusing. So I just do destination because all that takes in is a view we want to go to. And for that, we want to go to our framework detail view, right? And we want to initialize that with a framework. And again, this is this framework that we're iterating through. So we want to pass that framework to the destination view. And then is showing detail view. Again, same thing. View model dot is showing detail view. And then that destination needs open and close curly braces and X. There we go. So that should be working. I'm going to get rid of the preview real quick just so you can see the code, kind of how it should look. Put our parameters down there. So trying to make this look as neat as possible here, right? So we have our navigation link. It takes in a destination. What that destination is whatever view you want to be your detail view. For us, it's our framework detail view. our framework detail view takes in two parameters, right? It needs to know the framework, and then it needs to know if it is showing detail view, and that's what we're passing in the binding. Really, this is like the exact same thing that we're passing into the sheet here, right? It's just a little different. And on that note, we don't need the sheet anymore, so we can delete that because we're not presenting a sheet, we're presenting a detail view. So we essentially moved all the stuff from our sheet up into here into our destination on our navigation link. So the navigation link has the open and closed curly braces, and inside that we have our framework title view. We're basically saying whatever is tapped on the list, which is our framework title view, that's when you trigger the navigation link. And I'm gonna actually make my code smaller for a second, just to show that like, when you're actually coding on your screen, and you may see it, it's actually not that big. It's just I got to blow up my font so huge. Trust me, it drives me nuts how my code looks when I'm teaching. Okay, so now if we run this on the simulator here, and here we are, not looking 100% like I want it to look, but the general functionality is there. Let's tap on CarPlay. Right? See, we're sliding the navigation controller over to our detail view. You can see we get the back button. We still have our X here, so this doesn't look quite right. So we do need to make some adjustments here. So let's go back. The first thing I want to do is these are quite big, at least for my taste. We're still using that 90 by 90 frame for the image that we hard coded. So if you like this big look, cool, leave it like that. I actually want to go to our framework title view here. And instead of 90 by 90, let's do 70 by 70 just to make it a little smaller. We'll run that on the simulator. Take a look at how that feels here. Okay, we're getting there. The icons are smaller that I like. Now, you may notice there's a lot of padding on the top and bottom. And this is all subjective. You can play around with this, but I want to show you how you can tweak this a little bit. So instead of having the padding on the entire H-stack of our framework title view, let me pull up the simulator again. Right, I also want a little more space in between the icon and the label here. So I'm going to put the padding, actually, Command X, I'm going to put that on the text. Right, so that'll give the text a little padding, space it out a little bit. Let's run this. I know I'm doing the old-fashioned way, the running, but I've been having issues with the previews. So now I kind of like the way this looks a little better. Now let's fix our detail view, because again, if you click class kit, like everything's pushed down to the bottom. So let's go to our detail view here, framework detail view. Now we don't need that X button, so let's get rid of that, and we'll keep the spacer. So let's just get rid of the X dismiss button that we're doing. Give it a run, see what it's like. We could probably actually go to Canvas for this, but you know, I'm in the habit of this. Class kit, there we go. No more X, things are looking good. See AR kit, there we go. So the last thing, we may not want this blue frameworks, right? That back button, right? See if I click on something, it's blue. Well, let's make that white, or actually label, right? Because we want it, you know, black in light mode and white in dark mode. So the way you can do that is on your list, if we go back to the grid view, or I'm sorry, not on the list, but on the actual navigation view itself, right? Because that's where the back button actually is. We could do .accent color, and we can pass in color with initializer of .label. And you can see now we'll run it. Now our back button will be white in dark mode and black in light mode. So let's hit Catalyst. There you go. You see our frameworks is white. It's not that blue. So that's how you adjust that. Make sure our Safari View Controller still works as expected. Now we can hit back. There you go. So as you can see, that took just a couple minutes, small little tweaks here and there, and we converted a grid view to a list view. Now, if you're coming from UIKit, you can imagine trying to like rip out a collection view and replace that with the list view would have taken a lot longer. So that is a nice little benefit of SwiftUI, is like switching between all these things with relatively little effort. So the last thing I want to leave you with in this video is the challenge. And this challenge is going to be a little bit different. So let's click on SwiftUI here, right? Let's go to SwiftUI, keep the theme going. So this is our detail view. Not my best work, not going to lie. As far as like design, right? It's very, very plain. Not much is going on here, but this is where I want to challenge you. This is a little bit of a design challenge, but it will also give you a chance to play around with the layout of SwiftUI. So my idea here is redesign this detail view, right? You can completely change the layout, keep the data the same, right? We just need the name of our framework, the icon, the body, and the Learn More button, but play with the layout, like completely reinvent it and see what you can come up with. And what I think would be cool is if you came up with a good design, you shared it in the Slack channel. That way other people taking the course can see it. And then one, they can get inspiration from your design, or two, they can get practice building a bunch of different cool designs on this detail screen. Now I know it's pretty limited. It's not like you can go crazy with it, but I'm curious to see your creativity, what you come up with for the screen. and then hopefully other people can build it as well. So I think that'll be a fun little challenge. And that finishes off our Apple Frameworks app. Hope you learned a lot. As you can see, we're slowly expanding our knowledge. In the next app we build, the barcode scanner, it's going to be all about that UI view controller representable and actually passing data from UIKit to Swift UI.